What is up, guys? My name is White Grim Reaper, and today we have a video about Hunt Showdown. So Hunt Showdown is a game that has a lot of different options you can pick in all different aspects of the game. So there's all sorts of different guns you can pick, as well as your consumables and tools that you can pick every time you go into a match. The thing is, for tools, you only have 4 slots to bring in to each hunt. Knowing what's worth your time and what isn't can save you hunt dollars or even your hunters sometimes. Today I want to go over what the different tools in Hunt are, and to give some general recommendations, tips on what they're good for, and what I personally use most rounds. So I'm going to go through each of these by category, but we're going to start with the one tool that I think you should always bring: the first aid kit. Every single round, you should be taking a first aid kit. If you don't, you will be cursed with never finding health kits on the map. Ever. Just take one. It's that good. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get to melee weapons. Now, Hunt has 4 basic melee weapons you can bring into round, and you should be bringing one in every single round as well. First, we have the knife. Now, the knife is the basic, all-purpose melee weapon that you're probably going to start with most games. It's basic, it's not a bad option, especially for 20 hunt dollars, but I personally prefer to bring dusters usually. It's great for grunts, it's good for basic armored, but if you don't have something that kills immolators better, like a brawler variant weapon, it might be a little harder to kill immolators, especially if your friends don't bring anything for them. Next up, we have dusters. Dusters are my preferred basic melee weapon if I have to only go for dusters or a knife, like on a new prestige. They're only 15 hunt dollars, so they're cheaper. They're still good for grunts, they're not as good for armored, but they allow for you to easily and safely kill immolators, which is great. The big issue that I've run into with dusters and later the knuckle knife is that they can't destroy concertina wire, which gets really annoying sometimes, especially on Scrapbeak. Next up, we have the advanced melee weapons, starting with the knuckle knife. So the knuckle knife is still only 15 hunt dollars, but it is basically a step up from the dusters in almost every way. I usually take one of these almost every round. You get the heavy stab for killing armored and grunts and things like that. You get the light melee for killing immolators in 4 hits. You still can't destroy concertina wire like the dusters, which kind of sucks. And sometimes you have to be careful with immolators because you can accidentally heavy melee and lose yourself a chunk. But I still prefer to take these. And lastly, we have the heavy knife. It's slightly more expensive than the others, but it's 5 more hunt dollars, so it doesn't matter too much. I actually have been really liking the heavy knife recently, specifically because it will light one-hit grunts in the head. The heavy will one-shot hellhounds, which is huge, especially if you have issues with them juking you out all the time. And it's effectively the best melee weapon for everything in the game except immolators. So I also like to bring a brawler alongside, or force my teammates to do it for me. In my opinion, as somebody who plays primarily duos and trios, I think the heavy knife is the best, followed by the knuckle knife, with the dusters being third, and you should really only bring a knife if it's free, or if for some reason you just really don't want to have to deal with immolators. One thing to note here is that this is personal preference. As long as you're bringing something that you're comfortable with, that should be good enough, as long as you're bringing something. Next up, we have the thrown blades, so that's the throwing knives and the throwing axes. Both options here are pretty solid. The throwing knives are a little more expensive, but you get more of them, they're a little easier to throw longer, and they're great for a lot of different options, like killing hives, cheeky player kills if you want to do that, and it's also nice to be able to retrieve them every time you throw them. Of course, the same is true with the throwing axes. You get less of them, but they're really good for regular armored because the throw is a one-shot. And of course, both throwing knives and throwing axes benefit from the assailant perk. So if you have that, these are definitely a great option to bring in. Personally, I don't usually bring in either one, but that's because my teammates will almost always bring in throwing axes and throwing knives respectively, so I don't usually need to. If I need to, I'll bring throwing knives, personally. Alright, now we've got some other random throwables, starting with our decoys. So I used to take basic decoys pretty much all the time, and I don't really anymore. They're good for destroying lanterns above animal pens, destroying windows and things like that, and you can use them to bait water devils or basic zombies to a location so you can get past them. But you'll get screwed by them if you're opening up lunchboxes or looting hunters, because when you open up the lunchbox, instead of getting a new first aid kit charge or getting a new consumable, you'll just get one decoy. Blank fire decoys are a similar idea. They're a little cheekier, but they're still not great. Effectively, they are treated the same as regular decoys, but you can also blow up barrels, or you can try to throw them to bait enemies into thinking you're pushing or something like that. But the problem is the throw range isn't that great, so it's not like you can do a massive misdirection or things like that with them. I take them occasionally, but I don't think they're that great. Next up, we have the decoy fuses. I take these almost every single round now. I absolutely recommend them now that I believe the prices changed to be cheaper. They're a really great option. They're great for baiting enemies out of cover or covering the sound of something like a push or a reposition, and they're also good for igniting anything that's flammable. I love decoy fuses because they're great when you're starting to play a little higher level, doing a lot of player and PvP fights. Then we also have regular fuses, which are more useful than I think most people might think. They're good for igniting flammables like oil or barrels, and that includes hives or armored, though if you burn a zombie with it, they will die very, very loudly. They're also really useful in confined spaces to control vision and do things like creating shadows that tell you when enemies are pushing. I haven't tried this personally in a little while, but it's a really, really interesting option that I want to talk about more at some point. In that same vein, we also have the flare pistol, which I'm personally not a big fan of. You can still light stuff on fire like fusees, but you have a longer range. The trade-off is the sound of the shot, you have to reload, and you get one fewer. It does look pretty cool on night maps, but personally I wouldn't take one most of the time. And then the last in our random throwables here are the choke bombs. I take choke bombs almost every round nowadays. They are super, super good and have a ton of uses. You can put out fires, put out teammates, put out throwables that people have already thrown, put out immolators and instantly kill them. You can cover entrances with them, so if enemies push through, you get constant sound cues for where they are. And you can even put out enemies that you've killed and maybe have started to burn, either intentionally or accidentally, so you can loot them. It's great. I love choke bombs. These are definitely something I take every round, especially when I'm playing with my friends. Alright, and next up we have the trip mines. There are 3 different variations of trip mines in the game, and I think all of them are moderately good to bring, depending on what you want to use them for. First, we have the alert trip mines, and the first thing in my notes here for the alert trip mines is hehe barrel go boom, which I think is a great description of pretty much the one thing that alert trip mines are good for. If you place alert trip mines next to a barrel, when they go off, it will immediately detonate the barrel. Otherwise, I'm not a big fan of alert trip mines. They're really not that good. Knowing that somebody's pushing is good, but generally you should be hearing that people are pushing if they're close enough where that information is that useful. Next, we have the concertina trip mines, which are good if a little bit pricey. They're a great way to do things like covering entrances, especially inside windows and on top of covered ladders where it's difficult to defuse them or get rid of them. Teammates will constantly trip them accidentally if you're playing with a group, and conveniently, your teammates will also immediately get punished for their stupidity, so, you know, it's a win-win. You can also place and later shoot or decoy them to activate them in case you want to maybe not rely on the trip mine to go off, but just put concertina on an area. I think these are really good, and if you're gonna bring trip mines, it should be these or the next one. And then, of course, last we have poison trip mines. I don't think poison trip mines are terrible, and I think you can bring them if you're going for a poison build, but they get hard countered by antidote shots and mithril dentist and stuff like that. If your team doesn't take antidote shots, they will also constantly trip them. So it's kind of a trade-off. There are some combination benefits with things like poison sense now that that's out, but personally I'm not a super huge fan. One of my teammates likes to combine concertina trip mines and poison trip mines so that if somebody happens to go across them, he gets absolutely demolished. I've never seen it work, but I'd like to at some point. And last but not least, we have the category that I'm defining as memes. So these are items that I would really generally not suggest you take. One of them is okay, but the other two just don't. So first we have the electric lamp. Are you on a night map only fighting at extremely close range? Congratulations, you may possibly perhaps be able to blind somebody with the light. Are you in literally any other situation? Congrats, you have a big, gigantic, glowing beacon on you that people can aim at and see from miles away. Don't bring these. Just don't. Next, we have the spyglass, which is just kind of dumb. I mean, if you really want to see people from a distance, just take a gun with a scope on it, forehead. Then, last but definitely not least, at least not in this category, is the quad derringer. I think the quad derringer is actually not too terrible. It's okay if you have an empty slot and you're taking something like a Sparks. It can actually be super clutch for just some quick follow-up shots. Say you hit a Spark shot at close range, anything will kill them, so having those 4 shots from a quad Derringer could be good. You can also use it to do things like destroying windows, like I talked about for decoys, and the Derringer does the same damage as a Bornheim, so if you're going to take a Bornheim as your secondary, maybe just take a Derringer and take something better as your secondary. Honestly, it's not that bad, but I personally rarely take them with the intent of getting any use out of them. I just take them if I have extras. And so that is it. That is every single tool that you can bring in Hunt Showdown. So let's go over what my personal setup is that I run most of the time, most rounds. So first of all, we have our first aid kit. You need one of these. Full stop. Like I said, bring it. Secondly, you need some kind of melee weapon. I'm usually going to bring either a knuckle knife or a heavy knife, depending on what guns I'm bringing. So if I'm bringing a brawler, I'm going to bring a heavy knife, and if I'm bringing a weapon that has a blade on it, like a bayonet variant, then I'm definitely bringing a knuckle knife. Then, for my additional 2 slots, usually when I'm playing with my friends, I'll bring decoy fuses because of how good they are for PvP and the occasional need for fires, and I'll bring choke bombs because I play with people that like to rush and get downed and occasionally get burned, so it is great to save your boys from insta-burning bush Wookiees, covering lair entrances, stopping fires, all sorts of stuff. I love choke bombs. Of course, remember some caveats about my personal preferences that I pretty much only play duo and trio, and I have friends that bring throwing axes for concertina armored every game. As a solo, you'll probably want to swap out decoy fuses or choke bombs for something like axes or knives, just because you want to be able to kill hives and concertina armored easily, especially if you get cornered by them in the middle of a fight. And of course, one of the primary purposes of choke bombs is to put out your friends if they get downed, and if you're playing solo, then you have nobody to put out. So they lose a little bit of their utility there. And that's pretty much it. Let me know what you think. If you have any strong personal preferences for or against anything I said, be sure to leave it in the comments down below. Also, remember to like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to the channel, and to check me out on my Twitch, link down below, where I've recently been playing a ton of Hunt with the boys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.